Thank you, Neve. We are almost at the finish line, so thank you for sticking with us. By the end of this 40 minutes, we hope that you will leave this session feeling smarter about the real risks and the real opportunities related to AI. And I frame it in those terms because for the last 6 months, we've had a very exciting AI debate, but it's often been dominated by extreme voices around extreme fears or sometimes, frankly, unrealistic utopian visions about what AI can do for us. And there is a really messy middle in between, and those are the nuts and bolts that I would love us all to dive into in this session. I make 2 promises. The first is that if there's anyone in the room who feels they've not been keeping up to speed in the debate, do not worry. This technology is transformative, and it's going to be here forever, so you have not missed much. And number 2, everyone I work with at Axios firmly believes that because this will transform all of our lives, we all have a right and a stake and a voice in this discussion. So we really look forward to your questions at the end of the session. Arati, I'm going to dive in with you. You have said that the most important first step in dealing with AI is understanding and managing the risks. Not everyone agrees. Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, he wasn't sitting there consulting the White House blueprint for AI rights when he released his ChatGPT product into the world. So what are you going to do? Walk us through what the White House will do to shape this revolution and help embed our democratic values into the AI as it develops.
Thanks, Ryan. Just amazing to be here with all of you. This topic of AI is an active, urgent area of work at the White House, so I appreciate the chance to kick off for this discussion. President Biden has been very clear, and many of you must have heard him talk about how we are at an inflection point in history. And he very much talks about AI in that context, that it is one of the powerful forces today, and the choices that we make today, including about AI, are going to change the arc of the next few decades. And so that is why AI is such a high priority in the work that we are doing. And our work starts by recognizing that because of the phenomenal breadth of this technology, it is the most powerful technological force of our times. We all know what human history tells us about what happens with powerful technologies. We know humans are going to use them for good and for ill. And so the approach that we have taken from the White House on artificial intelligence is to say we absolutely want to seize its benefits, but the way to do that is we have to start by managing its risks. Because AI is so broad, its applications are vast, its implications are vast. So I'll just briefly give you 4 categories of risk that we think about, because you need to untangle this, right? I'm sure you've heard the cacophonous conversation about AI. So I'll mention 4 broad categories of risks that we are focused on in the work that we're doing at the White House. The first is risks to truth, trust, and democracy because of mis and disinformation. The second is the broad category of risks to safety and security, everything from self-driving cars to cybersecurity and biosecurity concerns. A third is risks to privacy, civil rights, civil liberties, including issues of bias that can be embedded in algorithms. And then finally is a very different category, which is risks to jobs in our economy. And I think that starts to give you a sense of how incredibly broad this challenge is with AI. So what you will see from us is ongoing work. The week that I arrived to join the White House in October last year, we released the AI Bill of Rights. That is a lighthouse to steer by. And I think when you're in choppy waters, as we are with AI moving as rapidly as it is, there's no more important time to be clear about your values. And so that's an important foundation. You have seen and you will continue to see many actions. Today we're working closely with AI companies, the leading AI companies, and helping them to step up to their responsibilities. We are working across agencies in government on everything we can do through executive action to get AI on a good track. We are and we will definitely continue to work with Congress on a bipartisan basis as they start laying out their agenda, the legislative agenda that needs to come. And then finally, we are working with our international allies and partners. And you'll see all of those lines of work proceed. I just want to step back from that to say, we know we are in a time where every nation in the world is trying to use AI to shape a future that reflects their own core values. And I think, we could all disagree about many other things, but the one thing I know we agree upon is that none of us wants to live in a future that is driven by technology, shaped by authoritarian regimes. And that is why, at this moment in time, American leadership in the world critically depends on American leadership in AI. And I think that's what we will keep our eyes on as we do our work.
Ken, I'll turn to you next. Speaking of values, one American value is opportunity. And your job is to make a bunch of money pursuing the opportunities of AI. And on the other hand, Google got slammed for not rushing products out the door earlier this year. So how do you walk that tightrope? How do you be a partner to the White House, but still make sure you're innovating and not missing out on those opportunities and not falling behind?
Yes, so we've talked about the notion of innovating boldly and responsibly and doing that together, doing that in a way that's inclusive and brings in lots of different views. And that's challenging, but we have, I think we're up to 13,000, 14,000 computer science PhDs who feel that they have a mission to try and optimize the benefits of this technology while minimizing the likelihood that it is misused. So for us, that breaks down to three categories, many of them paralleling what Arati was talking about. We have the notion of opportunity, the incredible progress we're going to be seeing in science and technology over the next decade. This will unlock tools and accelerate progress in areas like quantum, but also in things that make the difference in people's lives, like personalized medicine or clean water in the emerging world or precision agriculture and many more. So it's a really exciting time. I would say many people in computer science have never seen something like this in their careers. But that has to be balanced with a responsibility agenda. And many of the comments that were made before go exactly to this, making sure that we get fairness right. And we've had a ML fairness program at Google since 2014, our AI principles in 2018. How do we make sure we are thinking about the ways that AI is going to change the future of work? How do we make sure that we are staying grounded and factual in this information, which can be challenging? You've heard about machine learning hallucinations. How do we minimize the likelihood of that? So that's a big research agenda we're working on comprehensively. Goal alignment, safety, and many other areas. And then lastly, and particularly relevant to our conversation today, is security. We have to think about the challenges for cybersecurity, but also potentially the advances in cybersecurity we can have. We've talked about our SAFE approach, the secure AI framework, which draws on traditional strength in zero trust computing and work there, but also adds to it threat intelligence, groups like Mandiant and others, and now the notion of red teaming and adversarial review that we've started to work on throughout the industry. How do we make sure that we're fine-tuning these models in a way that minimize the harms and maximize the benefits?
And maybe Arati and Ken, if I just do a follow-up to you there, not all AI models are created equal. There are different levels of risk for different use cases. And people have been afraid at letting some of these things out into the wild. And so I don't want to get into too technical a debate, but when you release a big open source model, for example, and anybody can use it without really any restrictions, that can get used in a lot of different ways. Arati, how worried are you about how some of those models get used, and what are the mechanisms that can put some constraint about how these models get used?
Ryan, I think you're on an incredibly important point. A few months ago, we would have said that the progress in AI is purely dependent on more compute, more crunch time, and because of the proliferation. And when I was a venture capitalist, I would have said, it's democratizing the technology today. When I was in the Defense Department, I would say, it's proliferating. And both of those things are true. And that's the moment we're in. And I think it's a very fast-moving landscape. I want to step back from the specific questions and just note that what I think we all want is for an AI system to be safe and effective before it leaves. Before the horse has to be safe and effective before it's out of the barn, irrespective of whether you're putting it out as an open source model or as a proprietary model with an interface that people can use. And I think we have to stay anchored on this question of safe and effective. And I think we should be clear that we actually don't have tools and methods today to know when an AI model is safe and effective. So that
by
is
definition,
the work
they're
to be
not
done.
safe and effective.
We
can't measure
simply
it, we
don't
can't-
know, right?
Yeah.
And that's a bad place to be, and that's the work we've got to do.
Anya wanted to jump in, and then
Yeah, I
Kim.
just want to jump in with one point, and it's really, all the questions go to Arati because she has the impossible job of trying to figure this out. But to those of you who aren't following this every day, the foundational models that we're talking about with Google and others cost $100 million or more to train. It's a huge amount of compute. Those are arguably, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, those you might be able to regulate because they're attached to big companies that we know. But then there's a proliferation of smaller models, some open source, some not open source, cheaper to train, and you sort of despair at ever figuring out how to create the standards and then stick with the standards for those. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's the dynamic landscape that we're in.
And building on both of those comments, I would say the notion of case by case, deployment by deployment, application by application is going to be critical, because it's very hard to have a general purpose, one size fits all standard for evaluation. But we do have decades, centuries of experience in regulating healthcare, financial services, transportation, et cetera. And so as we start to fine tune our models for those specific use cases, we can, I think, develop more benchmarks for evaluation, draw on regulatory expertise, and get to a better outcome that's more fine-grained and more nuanced.
Heidi, I want to bring you in now, as the voice of the people, a former senator. Why do so many people seem to be so afraid of AI as it's been explained to them this year? And how do we go about creating those building blocks of trust? Because it's not going away, so we're going to have to find some way to have AI that we can trust.
I think I like to say it's kind of the Jurassic Park, Skynet, Terminator, kind of when people say there's threats out there, you see, Arnold Schwarzenegger coming down and wreaking havoc. And so when we look at it, the problem is AI's been around a long, long time. And there is no one putting this new technology, the generative AI, in context. Every time you say, hey, Google, I do that because we're here with Google, or Alexa, you're using an AI kind of mechanism. You're using a assistant, a digital assistant that is going to help you get information, set your alarm, do whatever you're going to do. But yet we've been told that this is some new, emerging, scary Jurassic Park kind of technology, as opposed to an iteration of what we've been doing in the past. Yes, there are new threats. Is this a Guggenheim Bible moment? Probably. But it is not as scary as what people think. And I think the media has driven this narrative of saying boo every time you say AI. Boo, boo. Be very afraid. It's going to get you. It's going to take away your job. It's going to do this. And we know that over the period of time, looking at this, when you look at technology, when you look at innovation, we actually create jobs with innovation. They're different jobs. And so there's a need to have a transformative policy that deals with this, and that's actually what's happening. But I think when you look at the sense or the knowledge that people have, it is opaque to them. They don't know what this is. And when you don't know what it is, and you're told it's going to take your job, and you're told it's going to, make your baby have two heads, you worry, because it's not, you don't have a context to judge the honesty. I just want to say something about my concern. And I will tell you, I talked with a senator recently, very high placed, whose staff put together a deep fake of him saying something he would never say. Does that energize politicians to get involved in the AI debate? You better believe it. And so now they're in this process of trying to understand how that can happen, how do you protect against it, and what do you do about it. And so I think there's some really smart kinds of directional things that are being done in the Senate, being done in the House, being done by the industry. And so I think we're moving in the right direction, but we have to ratchet down the rhetoric about being afraid and amp up the rhetoric about how exciting this technology is for human civilization.
What do you think of Senator Schumer's plan, Heidi? He announced on Monday that he wants to do a series of AI insight forums to get senators up to speed so they are more informed before they regulate something that they maybe don't fully understand. Is that a model that can work in broader society? if the point is that this is an extremely cross-cutting, complicated transformation of all of our lives, do we in fact need AI Insight town halls across the country to bring people along?
I think honestly that there is a range of ability to understand this. I shouldn't say ability, probably a range of ability as well, but a range of kind of current understanding of the technology. And I think one of the really good news pieces of this is it's bipartisan. The concern and the hesitation, that the need to do something, but also the hesitation to step back and say, I don't know everything I need to know to make the right decisions. They're stepping back, they're going to analyze this. Now, the problem typically, what you would see in Washington would be a big food fight over which committee had jurisdiction. Whether it's Commerce, whether it's Judiciary, whether it's Treasury, I can give you Homeland Security. I think what Chuck's trying to do is get out ahead of jurisdictional fights and say, this belongs to all of us. Let's elevate our understanding so that we can be rational and have reasonable debate about the level of regulation. And so I think you should all feel comforted by number one, the bipartisanship, but also the measured approach that Congress is taking to advancing some kind of framework in which to regulate and to discuss AI.
Could I chime in on that?
Yeah, and can I throw you one question
Yeah, sure.
to consider as you chime in? Two themes that were bubbling up there were jurisdiction and know-how, jurisdiction and know-how. So are we going to end up needing a particular AI agency, or are we in fact needing to build up know-how across every agency in order to deal with these challenges?
Yeah, I think the place to start is just to recognize how extremely broad the applications of this technology are. And so I think it's not, to me, it's not a workable model. Certainly in the work we're doing in the executive branch, there's not just one action that's going to magically make this come out, right? So you really have to understand it as a mosaic and look at all of it. And I see that very much reflected in what I hear when I talk to people on the Hill. To your point about the majority leader's sessions, he's run 2 of them so far, and one was a general briefing for senators to learn about the technology, and then I was able to participate as one of 5 people who spoke on national security. That was the purported topic, is AI and national security. This was about a week and a half ago. And we ended up covering a lot of territory, not just national security. But the thing I really want to say is we had over half the Senate in a skiff having
that's the secure room.
In a secure room, very bipartisan. It was hosted in a bipartisan way, and we had people definitely from both sides of the aisle. And it was the second time I had been with a large group of senators talking about AI, and I have to just share that I thought the quality of the conversation, the quality of the questions that were being asked were very good. They were thoughtful. I couldn't tell from the nature of the question which side of the aisle was asking, and it's on an upward slope. Even a couple of months ago, I think people were still feeling their way. So I think that learning process is underway, and I think from the White House, while we do what we're going to do from the executive branch, we very much want to maintain that good partnership and get to some good bipartisan solutions on legislation.
And that is virtually unheard of in the U.S. Congress now, so we should give them a round of applause.
I just want to appreciate that moment. Exactly. Right.
Now, it sounds like there's a lot of partnership going on. Ken, I'm going to assume that you would consider yourself a partner here with the US government exploring AI territory. But not all partnerships are perfect, and there's been a rough ride for big tech sort of in the last few years in Washington. Is there something you could nominate that you wish Congress or the executive branch were doing in this field to make it a more productive partnership?
Well, I agree with the last comments that I appreciate the fact they are taking their time to get up to speed on the technology and do it in a deliberative way. We've talked about various blue ribbon commissions, et cetera. I think that's a helpful part of the learning process. And there are broad areas of agreement, not only just within the United States, but also internationally. You have Europe with its AI Act, you have Brazil, Canada, other countries that are also introducing new legislation. So areas like trying to provide more transparency with regard to some of these tools, figuring out what benchmarks make sense in different specific areas, having a risk-based approach so that if you're looking at very high-risk kinds of applications, one set of rules applies. But as Heidi was saying a moment ago, I hope maybe all of you have been using AI for many years if you use Google Search or Translate or Maps or Gmail. And I think most people would say those are relatively lower risk kinds of applications. So you do need kind of a horses for courses approach, and that doesn't come out of a bumper sticker conversation. That comes out of, to your phrase, Ryan, the messy middle, getting people in a room, debating how the trade-offs work. How do we draw on different high and important principles for privacy and non-discrimination, openness and security? How do we get that right? That requires getting the experts in the room. And I'm hoping that that's a process we're engaged in.
Yep. Now, Arati, we've seen a range of CEOs talk about their willingness to embrace regulation. I haven't necessarily seen any of those CEOs invite your team to come and look under the hood of their models into their offices. Is that something you'd like? Would you like an invitation from Kent or someone else to say, hang on, we're going to roll up in San Francisco or Seattle or wherever it is and come and check out how all this stuff is coded?
I want to step back from that question to I think we use
But you will have to answer it. You can step back.
Well, let me put it in the right context, though, because I think we use the phrase regulate and AI. We use those two words together, but I don't think we have a good model yet of what we're talking about. And where I want to start is to say, again, very broad applications. And it turns out a lot of the harms that we are concerned about happen to already be illegal, right? So when you use AI to commit fraud with a voice clone, when you use AI to accelerate your ability to commit cyber crimes, there's so many things that are already not okay. And there, I think there's a very important issue, which is the laws exist, is our ability to regulate and enforce against those harms as AI accelerates and changes how people do that. That is the issue there. And one, I think, very important step in this direction, a couple of months ago, the EEOC, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the FTC and the Department of Justice put out a joint statement simply reminding people that these things are still illegal, and if you're using AI to do them, that's not going to get you off the hook, and they would still be enforcing against it. So I think that that's a great example of a kind of step that I think is essential, and we're going to need to do some work, because keeping up with those concerns, with that kind of accelerated malfeasance, and then being able to spot it when you start seeing new forms of problems and a scale issue that we're not really ready for. Those are some of the things that we are working on right now, and you'll see more work. So those are some important actions that I think can start getting us to a safer place. The question of what you do about the core technology itself is what people usually want to talk about, and I think that is not yet clear. It's and again, I think I want to keep coming back. Heidi, I loved your point about Terminator and everything, and Jurassic Park. We're living in a time in which there are a lot of science fiction conversations about AI. There are a lot of philosophy conversations. I sometimes feel like I'm in a dorm, like a freshman dorm room at midnight. Anyone else ever have that feeling? There are marketing conversations. All of those should go on, but if we're going to make sensible policies that actually change outcomes, we're going to stay anchored in what do the human beings and the corporations do as they decide to build systems? What is the human data that they're being trained on? And then how do humans and corporations decide to use this technology? And then what impact do they have in the real world? And if you stay anchored in that, and then you really start working through and figuring out how do we mitigate these risks, then you get to some very practical solutions. And I think that has to be the benchmark against which we weigh any regulatory
So that's
approach.
more important than looking under the hood.
If that's part of it, then I think it needs to be considered. But the benchmark is always going to be, did we reduce biosecurity risks? Did we reduce the risk of misinformation spiraling out of control, et cetera?
Yeah.
And if I could jump in, because 2 points. One, in a sense, we are externalizing some of these models. So at DEF CON coming up, I think in the next month or so, we will be doing external red teaming, we and other companies, for some of these models. And that's a way of
That's
looking
where
at
really sophisticated folks go in and try and break these systems and figure out the ways they could be misused. That's what that event is about.
Which is a collaborative learning exercise, right? It's not really about who's first or who's best. It's how do we collectively learn from that, what kind of attacks work well, and how do we all build those into our systems. But ultimately, this has to be a layered system of governance, right? You have to have the companies individually taking responsibility for building things in the right way, security by default, security by design in the way these are created. You need cross-industry groups, whether that's a underwriter's laboratory or a good housekeeping seal of approval kind of model, to make sure what are the standards. In many cases, those can be faster and more nimble than what governments will be able to come up with, and in some cases provide the starting point for government regulation to get incorporation, to be incorporated into what ultimately the law will provide. Obviously, you're going to need forms of government regulation in these different areas, and you will probably need international frameworks to deal with some of the security risks that have already been started. Conversations have already been started at the G7, the Hiroshima process, the OECD, and other multinational fora. So it's a little bit of an all of the above.
We've been talking a lot about government regulation, but there is a whole rule of law piece of this that we haven't been talking about. If you look at 230, Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act, which basically said, look, we're going to use these platforms, these great systems that were created, they're going to be like bulletin boards, and we're not going to sue the bulletin board for what's on the bulletin board, right? So there's been a mammoth ability for growth in this area to be free of any kind of interjection of civil liability. That's not true, in my opinion, in generative AI, because a product is being created, and you already see litigation around this area, whether it is violation of copyright, whether it is, in fact, taking a look at using my image inappropriately, using my data. And so one of the reasons why you may want to look at regulation is regulation, yes, it can be a sword, but it's also a shield. That this is the accepted practice of the industry. Therefore, we've balanced all of these interests, and we're going to give certain levels of protection. And so when people talk about regulation, remember that it's not just always a sword. It can, in fact, be a shield from that other enforcement entity, which is called civil litigation.
Can I jump in here? Because I just want to double down on that. It's such an important point. This is in its infancy, and we were just chatting, getting our act together for the panel before this. And I don't think any of us here had a clear view of, should there be an FDA type institution? Probably not, because it's a general purpose technology. Should every department within the US government be working on AI? Should there be legislation? Should there be tort law applied? This is so new that we have analogies for this kind of stuff from different technologies, but here the analogies are all imperfect and we don't quite yet know how to apply them.
I want to do a bridge between that point, Anya, and your point, Kent, around how we internationalize or create global frameworks here. And so I guess I have a two-headed question. First part is, does the US actually have a second or in fact third mover advantage because it hasn't rushed to regulate? You know, it's behind the EU. China's already got a round of regulation out and has extremely high levels of trust in AI across China, actually. Not always for the best intended purposes, I would argue. So perhaps sort of by accident, we're in a really good position to be more flexible and do the right thing. And then in terms of the internationalizing, we had the Secretary General of the UN yesterday saying it really has to be the United Nations that is the forum for a global body. You've got the UK government organizing an AI safety and governance summit in October. You have processes at the OECD, the Council of Europe. I could give you 12 of them. So how do we take advantage of the flexibility that being a little bit slow off the mark in the US has given the United States and really amplify that to a global level for everybody?
I would jump in quickly and say the race should be for the best AI regulations, not the first AI regulations. This is going to be a long-term technology. We do have a little bit of time to get it right. We have a lot of great achievements to build on. The fact that this is a triumph for the ingenuity that our system has created and will, I think, have dramatic improvement, result in dramatic improvements of people's standards of living around the world is something to celebrate. But at the same time, we have to balance that. And if we take 6 months or a year to figure out what combination of executive order, legislation, self-regulation, internationalization makes sense, that's probably a pretty good down payment on the future.
Yeah, I'll just add that this isn't going to be one and done, and you will see waves of action. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen, because as a particular area gets baked enough that we can do the good regulations that really get us on the right path, when things ripen, that's when they'll happen. But again, I don't think it's a 6-month thing. I think there are urgent, immediate actions that can be taken right now. I'll give you one just as an example. Heidi, you were talking about how much AI is already in our world. Well, Congress has considered privacy legislation, has gotten very close, has considered legislation to protect our kids. These are harms that are happening in the world today, and the president's been very clear that these are things we need to deal with now before this next wave of AI.
So a privacy bill could be the
exacerbates
first
them.
AI regulation.
That would be a fantastic step and something that we continue to work as hard as we can on.
Heidi, you've sat, sorry, Anya, Heidi, you've sat in those discussions because those privacy debates have been going on for years. How likely is it we can get something like that out the door, in your opinion?
Well, I think there needs to be a sense of why are we doing this? Think about that. Why are we taking these steps to control privacy? Has there been an abuse of people's data? Have we inappropriately used it? And so I think one of the reasons why you haven't seen privacy legislation is I don't think the voters and the public are demanding it. I mean, if you gave a list, I was giving an example of somebody going door to door in a swing district in Pennsylvania. How many of you think that they're going to say AI is my biggest concern in life? They're going to talk about gun violence, they're going to talk about education, they're going to talk about student loans, they're going to talk about all the things that affect their lives. And so when you look at privacy and you talk to people on the street, and I would challenge you all, because I do this because I did a huge privacy initiative as it related to bank privacy when I was still in politics in North Dakota. And if you ask them, they go, oh, I lost that years ago, I don't care. Whatever, I'm not doing anything wrong. And so this is not a point of voting. It's not what's going to motivate voters. Jobs are going to motivate voters. That's why you see a lot of attention to job displacement, especially now the Democratic Party, who feels like they missed the free trade argument, ended up transporting a lot of jobs, is not going to make that mistake again. You hear that over and over again within the Democratic Party. Let's not be the party that dislocates so many people that we get the blame. And so a lot of this is being driven, especially in an election year and election cycle, by what voters are talking about. And they're talking about jobs, and they're talking about security.
Can I chime in on this? Because
yes,
I think this is a great example of, it's so much easier to deal with a threat that is staring you in the face, whether it's fictional or real, but that seems immediately catastrophic. But the privacy erosion that's happened in our society is so counter to the fundamental liberties in our country, and it's crept up on us, and people have traded away privacy for a lot of conveniences, but we are at a point where it is driving addictive behavior online. It's in my view, it is linked to the polarization that we're seeing. It's linked to the mental health issues that we are seeing, and yet it is so nebulous and so diffuse that I think we struggle to deal with it. So I
would challenge you on whether that is an access problem or a privacy problem. Is that really a privacy problem?
Access?
By access, I mean you hand your kids so they're crying, you hand them some kind of tablet and say, entertain yourself, and you don't look over their shoulder. I mean, and going back to my example of tobacco, you know, when you look at the tobacco settlement, we knew how vulnerable are social platforms today to the challenge, the civil litigation challenge. But I don't see those as privacy issues nearly as much as I do utilization, access issues, utilization and access. And I want to put a plug in. Look, you know, I used to pay $20 a month for AOL. That was in 1980, right? I loved it. I would pay it today. I get all this stuff for free, right? and I'm really happy. And occasionally, you know, if I get an ad for a plus-size blouse because I ordered, you know, a plus-size blouse before, I'm okay with that. That might be a little privacy violation, but I'm okay. Because I got to use email and I got to use I mean, that's how the public looks at it. You know, I'll tolerate some of that invasion because I get some goodies out of this, and I'm not paying Google for what they give me. I'm not paying Meta for what they give me.
Well, that
I
works when
respect
it's
your
Google.
view, and I'll
Yeah.
just say I think that it's not just about 5-year-olds getting access to tablets, because teenagers are in a mental health crisis that is partly fueled by this addictive behavior, and I think we have to see how these things are linked together. So we can agree to disagree on this one.
I don't
And
think it's privacy.
the effects of lack of privacy differ according to where it comes from. And so this might seem like a strange jumping to a new topic, but Anya, I wanted to bring you in and join up those thoughts to China thoughts, because there isn't really a lot of privacy when it comes to how AI is rolled out and used in China, and that gets used for far more nefarious purposes than blouse advertising. And you talk to a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs, Anya. We heard the Chinese ambassador today say that AI is an area for potential positive cooperation. Like, how do you and the people you talk to see the development of AI in China?
Thank you for asking that. I find the conversation around national security and AI in Washington is very animated by what's China doing? Do we need to run faster because they're doing it, or do we need to restrict, and how do we do this? Here's what I see on the ground in China. Elsevier, which is an independent agency that kind of measures this stuff, says now 4 out of the 10 top companies in the world working on AI are Chinese. A lot of the cutting edge research papers on AI are coming out of China. You can debate whether they're all the highest quality, whether they're quite as good as the US, unclear. We clearly lead the world in foundational models, the large language models that we've all been hearing so much about, but they're getting better. Kent and I were joking last night, well, not really joking, but Ernie, the new Baidu, large language model is actually pretty good, and every month it's getting better and better. When I go to Washington, there seems to be a sense, at least in some parts, that we can export control our way out of this problem. I don't think that's going to work. We put really harsh restrictions on semiconductors in place in October. Some of that was absolutely right. Some on chips, some on the equipment that makes the chips. We doubled down again with tougher restrictions on some of the NVIDIA chips just now, a couple weeks ago. Clearly, we have to do a little bit of that, but let's not have any illusions that that's really going to slow things down. So in a way, we got to find a way to move faster. And when I talk to Chinese entrepreneurs, they're energized. And let me just say 2 more things. There are these kind of memes out there. Well, the Chinese have shot their own entrepreneurs and now they can't do anything. They're not allowed to, and the Chinese are afraid of AI. They've already regulated, and it harms the Chinese Communist Party. I don't see that. I see a lot more the Chinese government having created clear lanes for their entrepreneurs. What's okay and what's not okay. And you know what's okay? Surveillance-related AI. Yeah. Visual recognition, object recognition, autonomy, and they're excellent at those things. So that's kind of how I see the space.
Yeah.
If I could just pick up, I think this notion of the global competition here is a real one. And ultimately, again, for the Aspen Security Conference, national security ultimately is underpinned by economic security, productivity, and we think these will be incredible tools for leadership of countries that do this right, implement AI in ways that are trusted by their populace, make their workers more productive. This is, in globalization, we were losing American jobs overseas. This is an opportunity to make American workers even more productive than they've ever been before. So if we approach it with that lens, I think there's an awful lot of good investment we need to do to make sure we land a message that everybody can get behind.
I think it's time to bring you, the audience, into this discussion, but I wanted to start with a question to all of you rather than to obtain them from you individually. So a hands up question. Who among you think that we collectively as a society have done enough to make AI understandable and accessible and representative of all of us? Who thinks that we've done that? There we go. No hands. We have work to do.
Maybe not enough coffee.
Also, the woman in the white blouse, and there was a gentleman up the back here in a dark polo shirt or T-shirt.
Can you hear this? Okay. My name is Sharon Height, and I have 8 grandchildren. Okay, and I went to a very disturbing lecture at the Aspen Institute, and I'm sure some of you were there for it, where they explained how AI and young children, and children in particular, at 2 in the morning, and there's nothing you can do, are getting AI friends. They also explained that they really don't want Google to release Chat GP5 because everything is getting ahead of itself. At this point, since they have voice recognition, I could get a call and saying one of my 8 children needs to be ransomed, and it will sound like the child speaking.
Yeah.
There is too much that is not regulated that is really important to our everyday lives. I understand everything you're saying. I understand everything about how it's going to do this and do this and do that. However, if it takes so much away from the generations that know how to do everything that I can't do and are doing things that are really very, very harmful, and there's no control on that because they are petitioning not to do Chat GP5 because it doesn't go like this to this. It goes like this to this. And you're not going to be able to control that if you're not ahead of all the things that you are doing. And I am extremely concerned about this, as you can tell from my speaking.
So you'd rather a more proactive approach to the regulation? Is that where it's headed?
I mean, how could you release the next thing and then it's going to be so far ahead that, yes, the young children will do it and they'll do everything with it, and we're not going to know because I'm not up at 2 in the morning when my grandchildren are all doing this. And I think this has to be addressed completely because I think it's a problem.
I bet you're not alone, Sharon. Any reactions up on the stage to that?
Well, just
feedback?
one sentence, there's a whole session on deep fakes tomorrow, so that specific issue.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the responsibility agenda, starting with the companies, the industry, government, this is exactly right. But I do think that the answer to the problem is in the technology. How do we build in safeguards, guardrails to minimize abuses? There are challenges with regard to proliferation of some of these tools, and how do we strike the right balance between open sourcing and keeping security? But I think this is a widely shared concern, and we need to make sure we get it right.
Can I just chime in and
Yes.
say, I think, I've heard the very rosy descriptions of what's possible, and I hear what you're saying. And I think this is one of the fundamental quandaries of this. Anytime you have such a powerful technology, it's a raw force, and you really have to be able to keep bright and dark in your head at the same time and realize you have to work towards both of them, mitigating one and achieving the other simultaneously. I think that's part of what we're all struggling with right now.
This won't make me very popular, but you'll never supply side your way out of this problem. This has to be regulated. You cannot count on the government to protect your children alone. That's just not going to work. It's never worked before. You can't count on the government to take every drug off the street. You can't count on the government to make sure that there are no risks out there for your kids. And so I get what you're saying, and I know that keeps people up at night. But we have to have a partnership between families and this technology. And the technology could, in fact, lead to a cure that would cure cancer, childhood cancer. So we've got to socially balance these things. And so I would just once again go back to, we have to have responsible usage of the products that are being created. And I would also say that one of the ways that we've done this in the past is through civil litigation, when you create the risk. So let's say you have a small startup company. It's not going to be Google, because Google has reputational risk. They're going to listen to you and want to fix your problem. Then there's somebody who's got just the great product that they're going to want to deploy. I mean, I think, I could go to some historical examples. They're going to want to deploy it. How do we control them? Where are they getting their money? What's the risk for the people who are borrowing or giving them the money to create these products? How do we create, monetary risk to people who create dangerous products? And that's not going to be done by regulation alone. It's going to be done in the courts of law in places that understand the rule of law.
Lawsuits are definitely one venue for that. The gentleman in the yellow lanyard.
Hi, I'd love Kent and all the others panelists' feedback on what lessons. I'm Daniel Lubetsky, the founder of KIND, and the Lubetsky Family Foundation starts with us. And I'd love to know Kent and other panelists' feedback on what lessons we can draw from Section 230 as it applies to today's reality. Because when I look back, of course, we wanted to encourage a lot of innovation, but neither self-regulation nor government regulation has prevented massive misinformation, disinformation, and abuse. And when I think about it, it's not just my grandmother coming up with silly conspiracy theories. There's people that have hundreds of millions of followers that say things that are, if you were in traditional media, you could be held accountable, even though there's high protections of freedom of speech. There is at least some protections and some liability, but Google can publish and disseminate stuff. Twitter can empower 100 million followers and no accountability whatsoever. But also, there's a huge conflict of interest because Google today monetizes false advertising. Like just a couple days ago, somebody used my likeness to sell pills for gummies to lose weight. And we had to talk to people, and they were responsive, but you have to play guacamole rather than Google and all the other social media and internet companies self-regulating, setting policies so that they prevent false advertising. It happens every single day that all of these people are misusing the likeness of others and making money off. And
the clock is definitely running down, and I want Kent to have an opportunity to respond, seeing as you were named, not personally, but the company.
No, thank you, Ryan, and thank you for the question. Look, we would argue that the internet, on balance, has been extraordinarily positive for the American economy, culture, and for people around the world. And part of that involves some challenging misuses and abuses, although the industry as a whole has gotten dramatically better. An example I was giving earlier is probably 8 years ago, 1 view in 100 on YouTube violated our policies. Today it's 1 view in 1,000. And that's in part because we're using these AI tools to do pattern recognition, identify problems, and nip them in the bud before they can proliferate. So there's an awful lot of good, and there are learnings from that experience. Now, it's odd that the advances in AI, which are primarily scientific, we tend to think of through the lens of social media. We could as well think of them through the lens of mRNA vaccines and other sort of scientific advances that we have seen. So on balance, we absolutely recognize the challenges. We have to stay on top of it. We have tens of thousands of people trying to do just that. We're hoping AI will turbocharge those efforts. But don't lose sight of all the benefits for distribution, access to information around the world, the fact that 1 billion people have come out of extreme poverty in the world, an achievement unprecedented in the history of mankind, in part because of the proliferation of technology and access to information. So it's a hard balance to strike, but again, if we do it together, we think we can get it right.
Having led the only amendment to 230, it's a real challenge, and partly because the courts have misinterpreted, I think, 230 and allowed nefarious things to happen, illegal things to happen, and then shielded those illegal things using 230. So I would argue part of this is court misinterpretation.
Can I end on one positive note? And then I really want Arati to have the last word because she's leading on all this. But we've heard a lot of doom and gloom. There are real worries here. There are also amazing positive things that are going to come out of this technology. And I just want to give a shout out to Ili Akhtari, who's been working on this at the Special Competitive Studies Project. He and many others have been pushing something that we haven't talked about here at all, which is a national AI research resource. One of the things that's been happening here is Google, Meta, OpenAI, all of these guys, it's our companies innovating and racing ahead. That's great. But academics can't keep up. They don't have the compute, and they don't have one big resource, one large language model that we can use for non-commercial things. And so I know Ili and others, a lot of people have been pushing for this. I know you've been doing a lot of work. And this is one of the many ways that we can harness AI for good. You get the last one.
I'll just finish I'll end where I started. This is a time when American leadership in AI is essential to the way the future is going to unfold, and leadership. We are so lucky to have innovators in this country that are driving this technology, but it is not just market leadership, it's the choices that we're going to make to navigate all of the issues that we just discussed. So I hope everyone here will stay engaged, because it's going to take everybody to get there.
You have been an extremely engaged audience, and I know we probably could have kept this going for a lot longer, but I think some of us will be interested to take questions when we come off the stage, and others will need to get on to their next engagements. So we'll cut it off there. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody, but thank you all for sticking out this discussion to the end of the day, and thank you to all of our panelists.